All right, so this tidbit is actually not going to be really much of a tidbit because I wanted to spend a good amount of time talking about how to study in medical school. It's such a hot topic to think about. How do people study in medical school? What is the best strategy? The reality of the matter is that you have to find something that's very specific to you. There are a lot of blogs, vlogs, advice panels, older medical students you can ask for help about how to study, how they studied. But I wanted to present the way that I study because I think that hopefully it'll be pretty widely applicable to most students. And I wanted to create a sort of framework of thinking about this strategy prior to actually kind of talking about the details of the strategy. So I took a lot of psychology classes when I was in college, and one of the topics that came up a lot was this idea of a heuristic versus an algorithm. And if you're given some sort of task, there's really two ways that you can think about it. You can, if we talk about a heuristic, it's about using a sort of mental shortcut, based on previous experience, in order to do the task, some sort of mental shortcut that you make up in your mind that'll allow you to do the task. Versus an algorithm is more of a systematic method or approach to that task. The idea here is that a heuristic, it's great, it's fast because it's a shortcut, but it's not always going to consistently lead to success in that task. Versus the algorithm is a little bit slower, but success is really almost always certain. And so I wanted to kind of illustrate these two topics with a very simple example of a grocery store. So you can see that these four rectangles represent aisles of a grocery store, and there's different shelves that are in the grocery store. And here you are, and I call you up and I tell you that I want granola bars, and you have one chance to get those granola bars. You choose whichever way you want to get those granola bars, but you have one chance. And so if you were to kind of think about it, okay, well, he wants granola bars. Let me look at the aisle labels, and I find that one of the aisles says breakfast. And so if you're using a heuristic, this mental shortcut, you'll say, well, it looks like it's granola bars that are breakfast items, so that's my mental shortcut. I'm just going to cut over here, and I will find the granola bars in the breakfast aisle, and you give it a try, and it just so happens that in this particular grocery store, the granola bars are not in the breakfast aisle. So you have failed, essentially. But let's just say you try the other strategy. Let's just say you go ahead and you try, well, you know what, I'm just going to go ahead and go through every single aisle till I find those granola bars. And you go through the entire aisle and you find them. Oh, here they are right over here. You get the granola bars. So you're a happy camper. You've succeeded in getting those granola bars. So that's what the algorithm is. The purple route is the algorithm where you're doing a very stepwise way. You're just going to go through everything. You know it's going to work, but it takes you a longer time. Versus the mental shortcut doesn't always necessarily lead the results that you want to. It can, and oftentimes it works, but it's not always the case. And so the way that I kind of think of medical school when you're studying is, for a heuristic, it's really all about, it's about reading and memorizing your slides. And, it's a pretty good route, right? You can read and memorize the slides. Chances are what you read and memorize on the slides is going to show up on the exam, and you'll do well. And I'm not trying to belittle this method. I don't think there's anything particularly wrong with it. It definitely works for a lot of people. But for someone like me, I'm a very slow learner. I like to be very detail oriented, and I like to make sure I'm covering all my bases. Is I like to do a systematic method of studying, and this is what I'm going to be teaching you. And you can say, well, Sahil, this is going to be a very slow method. And so I wanted to tell you how I go about using this purple route at the grocery store but I do it more efficiently. So let's go ahead and talk about this sort of algorithmic method to studying. And I'm going to leave my grocery store example up over here. So, really for me, the first step of studying is before you actually end up going to class. So the first step that I actually apply when I study is I actually pre-read the material. And let me clarify what I mean by pre-read. So pre-reading the material is not just glancing at the slides right before class and saying that you understand it. What pre-reading for me entails is I wake up early in the morning, and I'll talk in another tidbit about waking up early in the morning, super high yield, super beneficial, but we'll talk about that later. In the morning, what I do is I will actually reorganize the slides. So usually, the professor's going to give some slides for the lectures for the day, and what I do is I make a study guide. So I make a study guide. And what that means is I just take a simple Word document, like just a simple Word document file, and I take all the slides and I essentially convert them into a Word document. I'm not blindly copy pasting. A lot of times there's text that I want to definitely copy over, but I'm interpreting the information. And what that means is, oftentimes when a professor makes slides, they're kind of disorganized, and some professors do a fantastic job and others not so much, but let's just say that there is some sort of stepwise procedure that you're learning about. This is just hypothetical. You expect it to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in terms of the order of the slides, in terms of the steps, but oftentimes professors go off on tangents and their slides reflect that. So instead of going from 1 to 10 in an organized fashion, they kind of go all over the place, right? And so this is unorganized, and this is what makes the difference between those people who just memorize the slides and those who kind of reorganize the slides into their study guide. Is you are creating a framework of the material that makes sense for you. So what you are essentially doing when you make this study guide is you're reorganizing the information and re-understanding it in a way that makes sense. Your study guide is going to be potentially in a different order. The arrangement of the information will be different, and it's organized. Okay, so that's the first step. And I know you got to wake up early for this. Usually it takes me about, for an hour lecture, it'll take me about 40 to 45 minutes per lecture. And I know it sounds like a lot you're putting up front here, but you are actually kind of filling in these dots of this algorithm, right? You're filling in the dots. You're starting to form your framework. And so the second step, and this is where there's a little bit of variation based on what you like to do. It's, go to class, or you can podcast information, whichever one you prefer to do here. And the idea here now is you are taking notes based on what the professor says, and you are further adding to your study guide. So you're slowly filling in more of those gaps. Okay, you're filling in those gaps here. So you've pre-read, you've made a skeleton study guide, and now you're filling it in with what the professor's saying, clarifying important points. If you've had questions while you were pre-reading, hopefully they'll get answered. If not, you go talk to the professor afterwards and start a conversation. And then after that process, you will go home, and then you will use an additional resource. So you're going to add additional information to your study guide. And usually I don't go beyond having, there's usually a recommended textbook, right? And then usually there's also a, some sort of, prep guide, so prep book. And usually that entails maybe something like BRS. I like BRS a lot, great books. I also like Ridiculously Simple. For some of the topics, they have them for the preclinical years. I think it's a fantastic resource in general. And you're really kind of cementing it. You're making sure that everything that you've learned in the class and all the topics are pretty clear. I don't read the textbook. I put the textbook in here. I use this more as a reference, because a lot of times there are going to be images that the professor uses in the recommended textbook to explain a topic, and it's great because the textbook goes into a lot more detail on those images, so you can definitely go into more detail to understand those topics better. And so once I've added the additional information, I have my study guide. I never have to look at the slides again because I've pre-read it and I've converted all the slides into a study guide that's on a Word document. I've gone to class, added what the professor says, clarified information. I've added more information from textbooks as well as those prep books, and now all I need to do is I need to I print out my notes. Some people prefer to look at it at a computer screen. I like to print them out so I can kind of annotate them and highlight topics that are difficult for me. Not obviously highlight every single word, but highlight the topics that are difficult so I can revisit them again and again. But really, the last step here at this point until the exam is repetition. And so what that means is you're really going through the slides, going through your study guide repeatedly before the exam. And so usually I try to, per study guide, so this is per lecture, right? There's one study guide per lecture. You're usually going to try to get through them 4 to 6 times. And this is kind of variable based on how well you remember information. But for me, I found that going through maybe about 4 to 6 times before an exam really helps me cement it, and I know it to a T. I know it very, very well. And so usually the way that I adopt this, in terms of repetition, how I practice it, is about every 2 days, I go through at least 1 to 2 study guides, okay? And so, the idea here is that when exam week rolls around, at least at my school, we have an exam maybe every 4 weeks, let's just say. So you don't want to be, finish step 3 and then stop there and then look at the material the last week before the exam, the week 4. You want to have gone through the information multiple times by the time exam weeks rolls around. It'll reduce your anxiety. It'll keep your stress level low during the exam week. You'll know the information. It's just a matter of cementing the information again and again. So every 2 days, I try to go through at least 1 or 2 of my older study guides for that unit. And really just, make sure I understand what's going on. And if there's anything to memorize, I sometimes have an extra sheet of paper out and I draw out a mechanism. I draw out whatever needs to be drawn out. Sometimes I make flashcards with something simple like Quizlet. I know there are programs like Anki that use some sort of spaced repetition, and that's really the idea I'm adopting here. I don't follow a specific. I think every person is different, so I don't think you can necessarily say that every 2 days you should be revisiting the material. But feel it out, try out different methods. Sometimes you might do it every day, every 3rd or 4th day. Some people maybe once a week. For me, I found that I need to review old material about every 2 days, and that really helps me go through the information and make sure I understand it. So just to clarify again, really the idea here is you're going to pre-read the information. This is the highest yield thing. This is what separates you from everyone else. You wake up early in the morning and you pre-read the information. You make a study guide, a skeletal study guide, where you are reorganizing the information and you're seeing the information from a first perspective. And then you go to class. You're going to be a lot further ahead of people who just go to class and they look at the slides for the first time. It's really, if you just do that, you're really a deer in the headlights. You're just trying to understand what's going on the slide, and you really take away from that learning experience. So if you pre-read the information, you have some basic understanding that you've already created in your mind, and then when you go to class, you're further cementing it, and you really know the information after step 2. When you add step 3 here, you look at your prep books, your textbooks, and your prep books, whatever you have, BRS, ridiculously simple. Choose one, stick to it, you'll be good to go. And then repetition. It's a pretty simple strategy. It does take more time, obviously, than just going to class and then looking at the slides. But definitely, in my perspective, this is what is going to really, really get you through through medical school, at least the preclinical years. I have limited experience of just first year, but I have strong belief that this will work hopefully next year as well. And so let me know what you think. I like this strategy a lot, and I hope it helps you out.